move our province forward. Throughout her career, the caliber of her work and her passion to make a difference has resulted in numerous awards of recognition in business, politics, and community service. She has been uncompromising in her fight for this province and its citizens to succeed and thrive. And throughout her career, she has focused her efforts to ensure that all of Ontario's citizens, including those who are the most vulnerable and whose voices may often not be heard, receive equal benefit to their quality of life. It is Sandra's passion for equality and opportunity and accessibility to necessary services and support that has resulted in her ongoing commitment over many years to our centre and to the children and families we serve. Her influence can be seen in the timing of the government's capital funding announcement for our much-needed facility expansion, to the support for the expansion of our programs and services to meet ever-growing demand, knowing that early assessment and early intervention are the keys to ensuring the best possible outcome for our children, which means better outcomes for all. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Sandra Pupatello.
From the McGivney it'd be easier running for premier than to have to do that. Just so you know, that was just tremendous. And I noticed that we're here, it's this reverential evening as we celebrate 90 years of John McGivney. When does it happen that you spend most of your life hiding how old you are to then putting it in the newspaper that you turned 90? And you know, John is a very modest guy. He doesn't talk about himself. He never puts himself out there. He'll never take credit for anything. But now he takes out newspaper ads to tell everybody that he's 90 years old. So at some point that may all happen to us. He's looking pretty spry for 90, I have to say. Doctor the other day, and he sat in front of this young buck of a doctor, and he said, "Oh, one of my knees are really sore." The doctor stopped and he looked at him and he said, "John, geez, you're 90. What are you expecting?" He says, "Well, my other knee is 92 and it's not hurting me at all." It's like one of those old person's jokes you're supposed to dig up. He's not driving as much as he used to. He was on the expressway the other day heading from Tecumseh into Windsor. His daughter called him on the cell phone and said, "Dad, be careful. I just heard on the radio that there's somebody on the expressway going the wrong way." And he said, "Oh my God, I'm on the wrong part of the expressway because right now everybody's going the wrong way." It was so somber before I started, wasn't it? I was delighted, and by the way, before all this political stuff started, I had agreed to be the keynote speaker because of my own history with the McGivney Center, with John McGivney, and with Rotary. I was delighted to say yes at that time because of everything John, the Center, and Rotary means to the city and to the county. Tonight, I want to talk about leadership, truly leadership. I want to talk about John McGivney, about the history of the center, the former Red Cross school that became the Regional Children's Center, which became the John McGivney Center. And I want to talk about Rotary and why it's so important. And I thought I would just start by something that I found that was written many, many years ago about the origins. And it's important for us to know these kinds of things in history. I have to make sure that I'm dead on accurate because there's a lot of Rotarians in the room that were around 90 years ago as well. And they lived this history, so I have to make sure that I get it right. A long time ago, in 1949, and I'm just going to read one piece of a paper that was written Red Cross School. And some of you will remember this, or at least know the buildings that we talk of. It was the spring of 1949, and the late Mrs. Roy Stevenson, her name was Cora, appeared before the Windsor Public School Board to request education for the group of handicapped children that she had assembled at 1 Olette Avenue, the old ferry building. At that time, this was the Red Cross Center, which contained a therapy department offering physical and occupational therapy. She maintained that the parents of handicapped children were paying taxes for the education of other children and were entitled to have education for their handicapped sons and daughters. The board at the time was evenly divided. Half said, no, it's only wasting taxpayers' money. Imagine. The other half felt we should give it a try. And the late A.R. Davidson, who at the time was chair of the school board, he broke the tie casting vote. And they decided to go ahead with it. And when they started that, they appointed teams that would do assessments. And imagine these names of members who at that time were on this assessment team, just a sampling. The chairman, Dr. George Stecco, Dr. Joseph Berkeley, Dr. George Fraser, Dr. Eugene Varga. Now, I know there are people in this room that know these names because they went on to practice for decades. They were also Rotarians, and they were also giving of their time in this tremendous initiative. And as this school went forward, they said, as they wrote, 1949 saw a major breakthrough when Red Cross borrowed Miss Marjorie Box from the Board of Education to set up and organize the Red Cross School. Sensitive to the problems of a handicapped child, this determined and ingenious woman dedicated her time, understanding, and knowledge. And from all of that, the primary purpose is to assist these handicapped children to become useful, well-adjusted citizens. And here's what she said. This is to quote Miss Box. If we live up to 50% of what we know is right and stood up to 50% of what we know is wrong, we could change the world. That was 1949 in Windsor, Ontario. And I thought that was incredibly telling of what ultimately has become a tremendous history that we're in fact celebrating this evening. So I in fact want to talk about leadership. I want to talk a little bit about that history. 1949 at 1 Olette Avenue. By 1950, they outgrew this facility and they had to move to 1226 Olette Avenue. Surely most of us remember that building that is still sitting there today at Olette Avenue that became the Red Cross building that had a few more rooms in it, all jammed full of equipment at the time, and very soon after was bursting at the seams with students. And when that paper was written, it then outlined all of the folks that became affiliated, many of whom still are today. This school at that site went on for many years. And in 1973, for all kinds of reasons at that time, they decided that the school had to close. Enter John McGivney, who at that time had already been a member of Rotary for almost 20 years. At that time, John McGivney would have been a Chrysler executive with very weighty duties. And he said then, we cannot go without those services in our community. So what he and several other Rotarians like Roy Lancaster that ran the Ambassador Bridge at the time, these folks got together and said, we're going to have to see what we can do. Now Sherry Cunningham is here tonight. She worked with the Ministry of Community and Social Services for years. She recognized what John McGivney did back in those days of 1973. He went to the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, and he convinced all of them that if they could cobble enough together, they would build their facility and the ministries would pay to help support those services. And so from 1973, when that lobbying effort began, up until the opening of the school in 1978, John McGivney and his cohorts from the Rotary Club of Windsor walking with a boy with braces, and it told the story. He's one step behind that boy. He's always got his back. That man in that picture is John McGivney. In 1922, so throw your mind back further to perhaps your parents growing up in this area, it was the Rotary Club of Windsor that launched what was then known as the Ontario Crippled Children's Society, 1922. The Rotary Club of Windsor was started in 1918. So 4 years after they started the club, they went on to found this society, which became a province-wide society meant to support children with disabilities. And those ideas came from their American counterpart Rotarians, who were also starting the society in the U.S. Rotarians there as well. Rotarians who've been around longer as a club, because as Peter mentioned earlier, they started Rotary International out of Chicago, Illinois in 1905. So this is really long in the tooth for Rotarians to be affiliated to take on the cause of children with disabilities. It goes way, it's almost in the DNA of Rotary. So back in 1922, when they started all of this, and it was right here in Windsor that launched the Ontario Crippled Children's Society, and that was the language they used at the time, the Rotary Club here quickly moved to offer all kinds of services. Windsor did not have doctor services, orthopedic surgeons, etc. at the time. We didn't have those services available. Rotarians would get the children in their car and drive them to London, where the nearest doctors were for their appointments. People like John McGivney would leave their offices at Chrysler Building and head down to the train station and pick up the doctors who were coming to spend the day in Windsor so all the kids in the area could go and have their appointments, because often families could not afford this kind of care, could not afford to get to those doctors, couldn't pay for those doctors in the days prior to OHIP, and this is what the Rotarians did. So imagine today, in today's world, realizing that you must rely on a voluntary organization to deliver the most basic of services that meant the world to these young children, fitted with braces, growing, fitted with braces again. These were the kinds of things that the Rotarians did themselves.